Alison Knowles. I've mentioned a little bit about the scope of the Maverick series here. And can you just give us a kind of brief intro to who you are and what you've done? With particular reference to kind of the experimental musical life.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I came into the picture having stopped painting when I left Pratt and swimming around in New York not knowing what on earth I would be doing. I felt my painting exhibition was a terrible failure. I'd imagined I was the next Helen Frankenthaler, and this did not appear to be the case. And so I met this kind of bunch of people at the New School who were studying with Cage. And they seemed to have a non-ego approach to art making. Mm-hmm. And either I needed it desperately at that time, or as I've decided since, I really am not a painter. Mm-hmm. And I'm also not an artist who works in a solitary way. The best work I've done has been in collaboration. Mm-hmm. So it was a good time to start out with those ideas. We left on the first Fluxus tour in 1962, and by then I was friends with people like Cage and Brecht, and I'd married Dick, and I was looking forward to just touring with these people in Europe under the aegis of this group called Fluxus.
How did Fluxus come about? Was it already in existence when you kind of joined, or was
No,
it like a membership?
No, it was absolutely being formed on 80 Worcester Street, and I was at 423 Broadway, and these clusters of people would meet and decide that something had to be done about abstract expressionism. We had to take a stand somewhere. And it didn't seem as if New York was the place to do it. And this man, Mačiūnas, lived in Lithuania, and he had taken a loft at 80 Worcester, and he kind of gathered us together and became a really wonderful leader, if not an interesting artist in his own right. He was a brilliant graphics designer and put on these little flux kits a kind of a graphic identity that enabled collectors to put this stuff together in museums since 40 years. So it was George and the cluster around him, and it was the stability of the Cage class, which gave all of us a different way structurally to think about art making, in which who we were and what we wanted to actually do could be a factor in kind of a chance-oriented scheme that might have to do with what day it was, what color shirt you're wearing, what the best sounds were out your window that morning. And so the influence on Jackson Maclow and George Brecht, who is my particular favorite, having instigated the event score, which is what I'm still doing. I write and do event scores all the time, and what you'll see at the Phipps is a vintage Fluxus concert with my favorite event scores. So I worked myself into a kind of a position of supporting this form of writing 2 or 3 line scores in words and then carrying them out exactly. I wrote a pamphlet called By Alison Knowles, and it was the first Great Bear pamphlet in the Something Else Press. And then Dick invited artists that we met in Europe in the early 60s and mid-60s to also make a pamphlet. So these small publications were circulated all around for $1 a piece or whatever. And it was, I think it's actually the flower of Something Else Press, because it involved the group. Which is why...
That's one of the most remarkable things about this. It's more of a movement almost within a small community of people. Some people, like Harry Partch, they're individuals, they're isolated, they go off and do their own thing. But this is really a different kind of model, isn't it? A more social, collaborative model?
I just don't know how it came about, and I don't know why we can't do it now, but we can. It seems as if those values, or people feel more isolated now, and so they behave more independently as artists. And I know Stephen Vitiello, for instance. I know amazing young artists in sound, but they never imagined to really collaborate. And I think it was the event score, plus the times, this post-war USA, Jackson Pollock pushing us abroad, a kind of a sense of let's band together, present a united front, and see what we can do with European audiences. And once we'd done 2 or 3 concerts, we were transformed into kind of a road show. We were instantly famous. We could go to any of 5 capitals. I mean it. We went right across Europe because the reaction of the Germans was so outrageous. And at the same time, it was this element that that's exactly what the culture needed. And we were willing to take a stand there.
Was it a revival of Dada in some sense?
In some sense, because it was a group, but we never had Dada's political aspirations. Although George, many people feel he had extremely powerful political vision. I have never felt that way because of just the nature of the man was so schizoid and iconoclastic and weird and wonderful. I mean, he would walk on a stage with his strange glasses and his high white collar and his black suit and start rattling and spitting and the microphones wouldn't work and he was just some kind of comedian at the same time that he would remind you of Zara or some deeply eccentric, brilliant man. And so he was kind of the person we pushed forward to MC these concerts. And then Ben Vautier became interested in that role. And so there became a number of people who helped to organize the concerts.
You refer to them as concerts. Does it have a musical connotation as opposed to events, happenings, some of the other language that came about? Or is it theatre, cabaret, any of those relevant?
I think the concert is the most relevant because cabaret, I think we're now in a kind of that the established entertainment values go into cabaret, the ones we can count on seeing over and over again. And the problem with museums and shows or exhibitions is that then you get a kind of visual art context. But the word concert, at least in my image, is a combination now of sound and image. And there's more and more work like this. There's more and more works in museums and galleries which have a sound component. And if you look at any of the works that I'm going to do with Amanda this coming weekend, the most important element is the sound element. It's almost as if all of the 5, 3, or 2 performers become some kind of soloist in their own right, even though the music isn't written in terms of notes. Look how much music is involved with sound now. And I'm now trying to get myself into the frame of mind where I'm scoring sounds. In other words, I can write an event score for a piece like this. And that event score might read, go to cave paper, get someone to roll out some red flax, put red azuki beans in them, put another layer and let it dry. And we'd have a musical instrument, but one that for me now I want to have something a little more explicit. I want to be able to give this to you or to someone else and have them have a sense of time. I'm going to have a chance to do this in Miami at Gustavo Matamoros' concert series. It's called Subtropics.
Yeah.
And that idea that other people could play my bean turners, which is what I call them, is extremely, it will be a big step for me. It'll mean that I always don't have to carry my own work on my back. Perhaps someone, if they had a bean turner, could actually do it themselves.
Yeah, that's one of the wonderful things about event scores, and the meaning of the event is really in the happening of it. I mean, in the experiencing of it.
That's right. You're absolutely right. And that's what defined it as so important where we went, first of all, in Germany. It's because they never had looked at art or listened to sounds except through the filter of either a glass wall or people sitting down with certain instruments. And so that layer of separation between the direct experience and one that was authorized either by a critic or, I mean, that was just removed.
Right, and even the fetishization of the score, people say, well, the music is the score. You go to a store to buy the music, and what you come away with is a printed piece of paper, not an experience.
That's right, absolutely. You've got it all together right. Got it all together right.
Now, was that kind of parallel with John Cage's revolution and the whole kind of Zen perception of this?
I think, yes. I think where he was so amazing was he took these, I wish I'd been in the class, but I was in very good touch with it, is that he had no goal orientation for what he expected these people to do. He wasn't necessarily teaching music. He wasn't necessarily thinking that this score would have a future. It was almost a playful sense of interaction with people who were ready for some help in terms of how to structure sound or words. Jackson Maclow, who's been a great poet using chance operations, I think throughout the world the best, just turned 80 half a year ago. I performed my bean turner at his birthday party with great pleasure. So it was that suddenly there were people not only wanted an immediacy in the artwork, if not to do it themselves, but they wanted a sense that if they were going to pick up a bean turner or figure out some sounds and numbers to speak, that they were perfectly right. That what you do with the score is just as correct as what I do with the score, as long as we follow it. The difficulty is that sometimes one runs into someone who wants to load the score with other material, such as a dramatic presentation that doesn't have the minimal blank Zen appeal that the event score does. And I discovered that people, very young people, studying. So I'm going to go to San Francisco and do a workshop there, and I'm hoping I can get people to bring stuff from kitchen and street and things that they had never imagined even had a sound, and see what they can get onto a big dinner plate, and then we'll do a concert.
It's almost, I'm sure some people confuse improvisation with instruction scores. It's like, oh, well, they can do anything once they're up there.
Yeah.
But Zen is freedom through discipline. Can you talk about that as following the instructions, and is that an ego thing to fulfill the vision of the composer in the normal sense, or is it?
No, I think the vision of the composer is to actually pass it over to the performer, and the precision of how it's done is usually for me a direct measure of the success of the piece. And this needs rehearsal. We have to rehearse on Saturday afternoon. People who don't know anything about this kind of work, but as a matter of fact, there's never any problem there. Once they get the smell of it, they can contribute a great deal to enhancing the score. And what's so interesting about a piece like newspaper music is that people concentrating on anything, focused on anything. These people have to be focused on reading something in front of other people. And just the act of focusing and reading, you get a wonderful reading of that person, the way that they stand, the way that they pronounce the words or present them out to you or don't, and then it's just as you probably know, I just conduct the level of dynamics for sound, being for volume. And it's really, as are a number of those pieces, they're ways for the audience actually to look at other people who are not in a theatrical mode. They're not acting out a part. I mean, think of our favorite movie actors. They're taking a role and they succeed in being that other person or not. Whereas we're trying to read through to who they are somehow. Mm-hmm. So again, it's as if that glass is removed between the person who's performing and the person who is on the stage. I think John himself got a little nervous with us. And he would have people calling and asking about what we thought we were doing. But he always loved the people, and he watched them all leave the country, because none of those people live in the United States. They live in France, or they live in Germany. Most of them live in Germany.
Because there was a warmer reception abroad, or because America has nothing to buy from them, or what?
Well, that's interesting. To buy from them is probably, if you go into the economy of the German mark or the euro, I think it's quite a substantial percentage goes into art making. And we put nothing or so little into making art that, again, we're forced into a position of doubting what we're doing or trying to find other people to collaborate or show things to in an outsider's position. The German artist is not in an outsider's position. If he's been through an art school, he can most likely get a decent grant. I taught at Cowell for a year in Germany, and 3 of the people in my class went right on to get stipend grants large enough to live on. And they were not even 30, they were like 26, 24 years old. And I mean across the board, not just an occasional gifted person, but the idea that society is trying to have an art quotient within the world, within its country.
We've been talking a lot about American maverick artists of one kind or another. Do you think there's anything distinctive about being American and doing this kind of work?
It's a very interesting question. Well, I think I would start by saying we're a very isolated people, as opposed to French, German, people in Brussels, people in Scandinavia. It's kind of a unit of people who need and want culture. They're on a continent together. They have other social problems to work out. But we not only distance ourselves, but we often have government, and we have a social situation where the isolation escalates. And so when we had this huge kind of breakthrough of people like Pollock and Cage living at the same time, they weren't part of any sort of European or any other groups. They were just individuals. And that's kind of unheard of, that they were so firmly committed to what they were doing and to their pursuits that they could carry on alone, if you will. And I always find them quite interesting, since John would never speak to Jackson, or he would pass him on another street rather than passing a person. They represented such Apollonian and Dionysian contrasts that I would say it began in a way, a kind of, for me anyway, an American culture of mavericks, of people who somehow go it alone and make it alone and influence other people with their work.
If you look at the history of music in particular, you'll find that it's often behind the other art forms. The Renaissance in music is a couple of hundred years after the Renaissance in visual art. Same with the Baroque, same with the Romantic period. Once in a while, it seems like they're right in sync in the same decade in the same zip code almost. And maybe Fluxus is kind of like that. Is that why it's shocking?
I think Fluxus has I've seen in the last 40 years, I've seen these event scores become quite perfected. They become quite excellent. not that I'm saying we can do them so well in a few days, but the good ones have sort of risen to the surface. And I'm just back from Paris and Copenhagen, where we worked with my daughter's book, Fluxus Experience, which is finally a really excellent source book. Have I lost my thread? Anyway, it seems to me that whatever has kept the event score alive has also provided a base for its becoming quite excellent. I don't know what else to say. It's like someone who the form is honed down into the really dozen excellent pieces that
it's almost like there's a repertoire.
There's a repertoire that any one of 5 or 6 people can lead a concert, train people who don't know the work, and have it come out okay. Because part of it is that we're not using professionals anyway, that if a piece involves a dancer, then you don't get a real dancer. You get someone who is willing to dance. It goes to the spirit of the action rather than the skill with which it's performed. And the audience right away gets that.
Absolutely. And it bypasses the whole educational training in technique and all the things that are needed as part of the music industry to create a perfect pianist, for instance.
That's right.
And maybe that's why they don't appreciate it.
Well, it doesn't die though. That's what's so interesting. I mean, I could just be doing Fluxus concerts indefinitely. However, I'm very interested in developing this kind of paper orchestra, this orchestra of sound. And I don't know anybody else who's doing that. So it's kind of I found a niche, and I can do things like half a Fluxus concert and then half a concert with my sound brothers. These pieces are made from corn leaves, bright green corn leaves. And when I get to the door in Bremen, Germany on January 24th, everybody gets one at the door. And when they get into the room, I'll show them how to put them on their wrists. And then we'll just start to and some will go like this, and some will rush into it, and some will study what kind of sound it can make. And some will just look at me doing it. And then they can buy one for 50 cents or something like that. I have about 100 of them. But these were made out of paper, and this paper and this paper are air dry, which means that there's no pressing involved. This woman is pressing each sheet so it's flat, and that doesn't interest me at all. What interests me is that the air here, if she takes that sheet, instead of pressing it, just leaves it out on the line, like that yellow one, or if it was heavy enough, it would torque. To me, it would take a form that I couldn't predict, and that's what I want. And that's what relates it, I think, to my background in performing, is that I'm fascinated to meet these people who are going to do newspaper music. I hear this Russian woman, it's just a fantasy, and then there's this person who dropped out from Japan. We've got someone else, so it's kind of a way that I get ideas too. It's because in the rehearsal and in talking about this very simple event score, where they're not threatened that I'm some kind of great artist and they're some kind of great performer, that all kinds of other material comes up, and. So I'm definitely a collaborator from the word go.
And part of the history of instrument building too.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes.
Many people have tried event scores, and I know a lot of the effort that goes into it is to kind of generate simple means. It's finding exactly the right instruction that will generate the kind of parameters that are likely to produce complex and interesting results. At least in my experience.
I was thinking last night I was reading some Thoreau, and he was writing about economy, and I was reading about it with great interest that he had bought too many bags of dried beans for what he needed to plant. He was berating himself for that. And he bought 3 boards, 1 tiny bag of nails. He was going to put up a whole house around a hypothetical garden. But he'd made an exact list of what he needed, what he actually got, what he paid for them. And then that kind of economical thinking is what I mean, what you mean when you say minimal, that you're not elaborating the event with what culture has come in with this sweeping. Look at Radio City Music Hall at Christmas. I have to do that with all my granddaughters. I mean, it's come sweeping in with such commerce and such an overbearing sense of entertainment that any effort for you personally to relate can't possibly exist. You're whitewashed. You're just gawking at it.
Yeah,
really.
you're pinned in your chair with a Hollywood movie or with
And
Beethoven.
you paid $60 to get in. Yeah. So I mean, it's the whole thing is so ass backwards.
Having established that there's such a refined skill in creating these scores, can you point to distinctions between artists who make them? For instance, is like Pauline Oliveira's different from a Yoko Ono piece, different from yours, or Namjoon Paik, or someone else?
Yoko was a very good friend of George Machunas and helped him a great deal in a number of ways, and did a lot of designing with him. And she helped him, I think, also to get the word launched, and because she has a wonderful business mind. But she never found that she was comfortable performing the work. She wrote a book called Grapefruit, which has some nice scores in it. But for her, as a person in the pre-Fluxus years, it simply wasn't interesting to her to perform with us. For me, I was not so interested in George Machunas. He was just around the corner. I found him a little too mad for me, and I was building something called the Big Book at the time, which is a 8-foot-high environment which traveled around. And I really didn't have time for all these crazy people, but I had time for the event score and to think about, well, I think that's kind of an interesting form. Didn't even begin to write them until I was abroad and performing other people's event scores. And I noticed that my scores are very different from Yoko's, very different from Dick Higgins, Bob Watts, or George Brecht. And it's because of the allowance within the form for my obsession with small useful objects, handheld things that are either found or abandoned. And someone like Watts or Brecht is far more, I'd say, surreal or fanciful, certainly Watts, in structuring events which will call forth from people a kind of a bizarre, strange reaction, asking for gasoline over and over again at the same hydrant, and then just before the man gives you the gas, you say, "Oh, I haven't got any money," driving around the block and coming to another, a kind of a harassment quality. I have many events which are concerned with eating, clothing, and now I don't leave that behind. I'm putting a lot of my thinking into sounding paper, and then my friend Amanda and I went to Japan and Korea with just paper sounds of a dress. That I don't do that in a few days, but because I've worn out the parks. But the actual sounds of the different parts of the dress are different, whether it's flax or gompi or kozo, make a different sound.
And then Pauline Oliveira, for instance, has her sonic meditations, which are quite different again. Right?
Yes, they are, but I wouldn't say that she would call herself a Fluxus artist. She's a really excellent contemporary new music composer. She's had to do with the group as friends, But I wouldn't think of her as being Fluxus as I wouldn't particularly Carolee Schneemann. Again, a wonderful happenings artist, which brings us to the historical difference between the two forms. I would relate happenings more to Pollock's energy, and the event score more to John's energy. As I said, it's just like these things took all these, there's a theatricality about happenings, as Carolee did them or Alan did them. It was too loose and too wild. It was outdoors, most of them were outdoors, and in places which were either difficult to get to or presented you with, for me, too much decision making, too much a psychological framework, as the event score, some of which would go on within a happenings framework, like some of the work that Klaus Oldenburg did, were these theater pieces which were quite close to event scores, but not really in my book. They weren't that close, actually.
Yeah, so something like John Cage's circus pieces, the music circus, oratorio, do you consider those events or happenings?
I don't consider them happenings. I tell you why, because each part of the oratorio, and I've seen it a number of times, is itself very precisely an event score. Whether John is reading, whether he's reading The Wake, or whether he's reading Joyce in his own form, in the mesostic form, and then you have the drummer. You have people with very definite scores that they're following. Now, they may be real music scores in my book, but I wouldn't call them happenings, even though I know often they refer to that, just because you have different things going on in different places. Now, the event score I've seen in New York from the wonderful artist Larry Miller, who was a younger Fluxus artist. Simultaneities, 5 or 6 events at the same time. Mieko Shiomi has done the same thing in Japan. I don't really like this either, but both of these artists can pull it off because they're so precise in their own thinking that people are rehearsed and they just tend to their own world. But I think part of the really wonderful thing about the event score is that there is often quite a bit of space in it. I'm not going to make a salad, here. It's one of my most well-known event scores. And I'm not going to do it this weekend, just for reasons that we have almost too much material to cover in the time. But something like Make a Salad, people just have to watch the person cleaning the lettuce. I've mic'd under the table so we can get the chopping, reverberating, but even that, I don't often do that.
Is it fair to say that you are to bread and soup and salad as Cage was to mushrooms? Is there a different relationship?
I have not grown my own vegetables yet. Of course, Cage didn't grow his mushrooms, but I liked it so much that it was outside of the ken of art, something he really studied, because I really study beans. I really know quite a number of beans, at least the names, and I use them as kind of a mantra, often behind something else that's going on, because the names are quite evocative. But it was wonderful to walk with John looking for mushrooms, because he would never miss a mushroom. He could be the last person in the line. You would go through the woods in a line, like a serpentine line, and often I have seen him see something where everyone else had passed it by. Just that somehow the focus that he had for his work carried right into the woods, and so he'd call out, and we'd pick the mushroom and then key it out according to the Smith book, and decide who would take it home. Many of the people in that group were, some of them were artists, but it was a way, when I first knew Dick Higgins, that we could kind of study Cage as a friend outside of his magnificent work.
Yeah, that's a wonderful way of kind of Zen teaching, is just being around a master and steeping it by osmosis into your practice, and where art and life are kind of really connected in Cage's and your work.
Well, for instance, George Brecht, who is, I consider, has done the most work on the event score of anybody, and actually discovered it in the Cage class. He doesn't care for John's music at all, and he's very unsophisticated musically. He listens to Grand Ole Opry, but another part of his mind is very active. But he's not interested in the other part of his head. So that exists too. People have this compartmentalization they go through. And I think to really overtake Cage's music and love it, you have to give it some time. You have to look at some scores. You have to think about the amount of labor the man has put into a score. Still astonishes me. Look at a piece like the Rio Angie series with the rocks. 5,000 times going around a single rock. 5,000 times. My friend Klaus Schoening, who was at West German Radio, stayed with him over about a 4-day period, and he would wake to the sound of John's pencil going around the same rock for the few hours that he had before breakfast. And you're sure that it was exactly 5,000. I don't know, you're just absolutely sure that there wouldn't have been any devaluation of that commitment. 4 minutes, 33 seconds. Do you know how he got that number?
Tell me.
Very nice story. He was at Carbondale, and he wanted a way to have the I Ching come out of a computer instead of sitting there as we had to do with the notations book and throw coins all morning and write down, open the book and find a number and then send it to the composer, how many words he could speak about notation. Again, an extremely labor-intensive book. Well, he went to the computer one morning when he was in Carbondale, and they said, well, we have to know, before we start generating all these I Ching numbers, how long are you going to have this piece go on? Give us a structure. So he sat down and he asked the birthday of the programmer. And so it was the 4th month, January, February, March, April, and the man was 33. So somehow, very quickly. And then he always is quick to say to people, well, it could have been another number. I was at the 50-year anniversary of that piece in Woodstock with Margaret Lang Tan, and I thought, how many people think, well, he walked up and he thought 4 minutes, that was some kind of decision of his own, some personal decision of his own, but he always outfoxes you there, that guy.
And I hadn't realized it had been performed outside. Normally when you read about it, you think, oh, it's in a concert hall and David Tudor walks on stage and everything's kind of the concert hall isolated environment, but it was actually an outdoor performance, right, originally?
The concert hall where it's performed opens onto the outdoors.
Okay.
But there are seats and there are 3 walls. And right. It's kind of a country setting in the woods, so that the doors could be thrown open.
So you might hear birds and dogs in addition to coughs and...
You well might. The problem with the performance was that she wanted to change it, bless her heart, to be different. And so she did it on a little toy piano. And the little piano wasn't quite solidly placed on the top of a series of boxes, and it's too teetery. And then you open and shut the cover, and it creaked miserably. And then to top it off, someone knocked their packages off the chair. But I don't know. It all could have been all right, but as John would always have, and David will always have, the tenor in the room, the ambience of the room had to be of a certain quality. And I learned that from them. And I feel the same way about these Fluxus event scores, that they're not tossed off. They're not changed around, or I don't mean you don't identify and give it your own view, if you will, of who you are, but something takes over the silence, and it's not the ego of the performer. It has to do with the projection of the audience. It has to do with some quality that that performer has established and then stepped back from even the act of doing it. It's as if they're carrying something out for all of us. It's hard to describe, but
That's
it's
interesting.
a precious quality.
It reminds me of Chinese traditional music. There are some Confucian kind of lists of 8 precepts about when you must perform music, and all of these conditions have to be met. It's true for Vietnamese traditional music too. And the costume has to be right, and it can't be either dusk or dawn just at that moment, and the wind has to be right. So basically the conditions and the atmosphere and the seriousness of intent.
Seriousness of intent,
Yeah.
you see.
Yeah.
I've seen, for instance, there's a piece, a very Dionysian Fluxus piece by Pape, where you break the violin on the piano. It's called Solo for One for Violin, and Pape wrote it for George Machunas. And I watched it for so many years. An old violin is broken over a table. And then, of course, on the other side of it is this gentle George Brecht, who will polish a violin in front of the audience. Seems like those two poles of Cage and Pollock have kind of marched on in people's actual psyche.
Yeah. Is Brecht still composing? I haven't heard anything.
No,
recently.
he's totally retired and not very well. He's, I guess he's 75 now. But, his view is that Fluxus has fluxed, and that to do these pieces anymore, he would have to really enjoy doing them. And as a performer, he always had a quality that he was carrying them out, kind of, but not that he was imbuing the space. He's had quite a bit of attention, I would say, and justly so, for the notebooks that he did in the Cage class. And those are available from Walter Koenig, Koenig Verlag, Buchstabe am Dom in Cologne. So you can get all those notebooks, which were published by Norman Brown.
Those were like class notes he took during Cage's classes.
Yes, and they're just amazing. Even the spiral notebook cover has been facsimiled, so, and all the little side notes. And there's so much material in there that he could have done. He could have worked out his whole life. But somehow he wasn't interested in continuing to do art. So that happens to people. It's very interesting. He's doing quite well, and he lives outside Cologne. But no, he also refuses to see anyone, which is too bad.
Someone else in that class was Dick Higgins, right?
Right.
Tell me about him. He was wonderful in so many different ways.
Right, so many different ways, which I think is characteristic of most of the people in the group. A kind of freedom to move in that time. A good dancer could write a poem, or someone like myself who has just had very minimal music training could imagine putting work into singing. And Dick's background was that he went to Yale, he studied music, he went to Columbia, he had a tremendous intellectual background and was a really brilliant man. So when he started to begin this press, which is waiting for George Machunas to publish his book, waiting to, as is usually the case with these Fluxus objects, there had to be some kind of a benefactor somewhere. And finally Dick just decided that he wasn't going to wait anymore. And we were at the time, we had a loft on Canal and Broadway, so he just walked in one day and said, I've decided to start a press. What shall I call it, Alison? You know the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so he said, I think I'll call it Shirt Sleeves Press. I said, no, call it something else. Which he did.
Yeah.
He was very quick, and he wrote wonderful poetry. Criticism, some art criticism, and some theoretical books. But he was extremely wary of academia and extremely wary of theoretical writing in general, which is what attracted him to Fluxus. He could just be doing these amazing things. He did some operas and happenings, and formed for all of us, and my daughters, and George, and Brecht, all of us, a kind of a center in New York, which really, it's very hard to describe it. We were at 22nd Street at that time, and we had a whole house, so that Dick would have a whole floor for his press, and I could have a whole floor for my studio, and we had our domestic life in the basement. Ben Patterson and Philip Corner also lived in this amazing 238 West 22nd Street house behind the Chelsea Hotel. But I don't know, I was thinking of saying how those values are completely disappeared, and how these overlappings don't exist anymore. But then I think it depends on the nature of the artist, him herself, because I've found my way now into a group of skilled paper makers who are willing to make these instruments, not only in Minneapolis, but in New York and in California. I can have Amanda working on the bean turner, and I can have Paul Long at Dieudonné making small bean crackers, I call them, which are threaded for individual people to. It's I think you kind of make the times around yourself. Mm-hmm. And also I've been very grateful that I've been able to travel all the time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it bores me not to be home more, but anyway, I don't have cats or canaries. Right. I just have plants to be watered. Mm-hmm. And so I'm off to Germany for a show in January, as I say, that I'm very excited about. And it's half of it is musical instruments, and half of it is strange books.
Dick and Something Else Press and several other artists who've started their own presses, it's kind of important and neglected movement in American culture. I'm thinking of like Kenneth Kaburo with Lingua Press, Sounding Source magazines.
Jonathan Williams. I mean, all these
small... all of these people who see the value of the work and want to give themselves and other artists a voice, because the big medium doesn't care. The big publishing houses don't see any profit in it, and so aren't going to do it. Even Anais Nin, they're looking at Harry Partch stuffing his own records and say, "That was me when I first did this." It's such a wonderful, generous spirit, financially, time-wise, and it makes all the difference in the underground, right?
Well, is there an underground anymore? See, that's what I don't know. I know that there certainly was in the 60s and 70s. And I don't know if it had to do with the war being done, or whether it had to do with just the people who had coalesced in one place. But the world was very available to do these different things, with no money, really. Mm-hmm. And now I find that I just got a very nice grant from the government. And finally I feel I can make my studio what I want. And I can make these instruments myself and with other people. But how different it is from the German student at 23 who can present a few pictures and if they've done well in school, get a grant every month. Same in Holland. Mm-hmm. There's a stash of art in Holland, which is unbelievable because the government supports their artists.
Yeah. Getting back to Dick for a moment, he was very close with Cage and Henry Cowell too.
And Henry Cowell, and there's a wonderful book. It's called Essential Cowell, and it's put out by Bruce McPherson.
Did you ever meet Cowell?
Yes, I did. Yeah. And I heard him play some of his amazing music with the rolling arms. It's the same night that Cage did the theater piece. It was it wasn't the Theatre de Lys, that was Threepenny Opera, but it was a small theater in the village. And I was astonished at what a diminutive figure Cowell was. He was precise and lovely, short, and charming. And I don't know what I expected, but Dick is such a big guy, and Cage is tall, and here was this almost elfin-like guy. But when he sat down to play the piano, I think I heard for the first time really these tone clusters that he generated, and his tremendous knowledge of new music. I mean, we used to listen to him on WBAI every Sunday morning. He'd just been back from Bali or Russia or somewhere, and he really brought in to New York a very high level of international culture.
Because he'd been doing that since the 30s with New Music Society and everything. He was extremely supportive. And,
Yes.
it seems that he changed radically after San Quentin and the whole homosexual affair, whatever that was about.
Whatever that was about. But he gave so much to connect composers and to have other music done. I personally I don't like all his music so much, but why should everybody be of the same disposition? And I knew Sydney too. What they did together was just connect the world of musicians and composers beautifully. People loved him and Cowell.
No, I'm sure he'd been...
And Dick actually was the one who made some tapes of talking with Sydney. Beautiful tape, stories. If you ever come to New York, I'll play you that tape. And then with Henry, he was a student of Henry Cowell at Columbia, I believe. I'm not sure what Henry made of Dick Higgins, but Dick was very fond of him and enjoyed the class, I know, because he was taking Cage at the same time. Can you imagine? So what I found interesting was Cowell's acceptance of Cage. Found that exceptional.
Yeah, really. Now, thinking through some of these people, Cowell, Cage, Dick, and many more, that they came out at some stage in their lives, or went back in the closet.
Oh.
Do you see any patterns there, or how
I just don't think it matters so much, which I think is what Cage has answered when he was given that direct question. I think, and when I'm asked about what it was like to be the only woman in Fluxus, it's the politics of these things wasn't a big news. It was just kind of your private life, and it was respected as such. I know that now the idea of being gay or straight seems to be of profound interest to people. Well, it really doesn't matter very much to me, I think as long as it doesn't impair the work you're trying to do, that truly it's a side issue. But I may be of another generation.
So it just seems that sometimes there's a relationship between the kinds of creative thinking that people go through when they feel isolated, or and you mentioned like talking to Sydney. Well, it seems that part of her activities were to cover up a lot of, or at least to control the mythology surrounding Henry.
Yes.
So I don't know if that is relevant to if it's reflected in the art that comes out of it.
I really don't know. I know that it's not a big issue in the book. I hope you'll get the Essential Cowell.
Sure.
The Essential Cowell to me is incredible diary accounts of this man in other countries.
There's another mythology surrounding Dick, which you can lay to rest immediately. I read that he was born on Jesus Pieces in Cambridge. I don't know any Jesus Pieces. There's Jesus Green and there's Christ's Pieces. And
that's interesting. He was born in Jesus Pieces, which is on very close to what's the university where his father was studying economics in London.
Oh, so not in Cambridge?
In Cambridge, right. There must have been a little hamlet called Jesus Pieces. Did you look it up? Did you try to
Well,
find
no,
it?
I was born in Cambridge too, so
I think
there's
Jimmy-
Jesus College. There's Jesus College, which has a green in front of it. I don't know where you would actually be born on the green. It's just a little
No,
path.
no.
And then there's Christ Pieces, which is next to Christ College. But those are different
Oh,
things.
that's fascinating.
So it
That's,
merits
it's
further
never
research.
been challenged on where Dick was born before.
And then I read that he actually died when he was performing in Quebec at a festival. And earlier that day, he'd been doing danger music, which involved screaming at the top of his lungs. Is that true, or was that a conflating two events?
Well, the festival, the Inter Festival in Quebec City, which we've both been to a number of times, and I almost was there myself. Larry Miller was there. I think Heitzig was there, certainly. Dick did an interview, and whether he did the scream piece, I'm not sure, but he certainly didn't die on the stage.
Yeah.
He had dinner with Charlemagne Palestine, got very tired and went home to bed, and died between winding up the alarm clock and stepping into bed. It was a 30-minute affair. His heart was full of, filled up, the ventricle was filled up, which is a story that happened because he had this automobile accident and he'd been in a wheelchair for nearly a year and hadn't been taking care of the rest of himself very well.
Right.
I, as usual, was traveling too much. I wish I'd kind of set everything aside and just cared for the man. But he did fairly well, and was just getting back on his feet. And he was not in a wheelchair when he went to Quebec. He was on crutches, and was kind of making his way back into performing again. He did a wonderful interview, which we have that very evening. Now, whether he did the Danger Music 13, no, I'm not absolutely sure, but it's possible. I know that wasn't a favorite of his in his later years.
Yeah, that could be exhausting.
Yes.
Charlemagne Palestine, you mentioned. Did you know him well? Do you?
Yes, he was at Cowell. I knew him somewhat there because we performed with Simone Forti at UC Irvine, and he used to play a Bosendorfer piano, and I was always very impressed that if he played for 3 hours, he would be served by lovely women who would light his cigarettes and bring him beverages to drink and pour them. And he was quite a showman, let's put it that way.
So minimalism turns into an event score after 3 hours.
Well, I'm not sure that I would put Charlemagne in any kind of category like the event score, but he could have, certainly he did make some wonderful evenings with that Bosendorfer piano. I know, I saw him about a year ago somewhere. He's okay.
We've been asking people if they had 3 desert island discs, what would they be and why?
Oh my. Well, I'm listening at the moment to a wonderful vocal that is Monteverdi. And actually it was from Dick's collection, and I'd kind of heard it in part of my mind. And I've been playing that. I just love it. It's just vocal, a cappella. It's just magnificent. I think also John would sometimes say that it was the quality of the human voice that enabled people to do such outrageous things as opera.
Yeah.
And it's because when you really have almost perfect pitch with a countertenor and wonderful alto soprano, I mean, I'm thrilled with the human voice. And then I play a disc by Philip Corner, who's not known so much, unfortunately, in this country anymore.
Tell us about him.
He now lives in Reggio Emilia, Italy, and he works with gamelan almost exclusively. Goes to Indonesia, not so recently. He's had some illness, but he has a gamelan orchestra, and he makes event scores with metal objects, in which he studies a couple of cans and a spoon, and he would do very different things with them than what I would do with them. which is something I've always wanted to do, is give the same tools to 5 artists and ask them to make a score and then make a CD of what each one does with it. But his were all metal meditations. So things could be swinging into a wall or just touched lightly with a spoon. And he did a graphic to accompany them. So the event score was written on a graphic. So that gives me 3, or is that 2?
You can have one more.
Well,
You're allowed one more.
okay. I have a interest in American Indigenous music. I had a husband once. Unfortunately, the relationship was just really awful when I got out of Pratt for a few years. And he had me listening to such things as the Carter family, Hank Williams. And then I met Harry Smith, the filmmaker. I don't know if you know Harry Smith's funny
You refer to him as a
films.
filmmaker, which is interesting, as opposed to like the anthology, which maybe is what you're going to talk about. A few people remember that he was a filmmaker.
Oh, yes. And a perfectly fascinating person. And Harry Smith brought me into kind of a world of contemporary jazz in New York, where he would sit making films at a table, scratching into them and painting on them for hours. He'd just sit there. I don't think he ate or drank anything his whole life, but maybe a glass of milk. But somehow I got a really pretty good basis of jazz from that late 50s, like Cecil Taylor, whom I still admire. And as I say, I still could listen to good country music. It has to be good. It has to be some, as of the vocal. Yes, Harry Smith.
Yeah, I was really surprised and amazed when I saw his films. They recreated some for the Walker, and they found all these old projectors and these loops and things, and it's obviously a lifetime's effort. And then it was like, this bit of Monty Python, Terry Gilliam, and everything else thrown in there. This is incredible.
Incredible.
Yeah.
He's someone else I admire because it's sort of an era that couldn't ever happen anymore. He for his whole life never paid any rent, and he always had a roof over his head. And as I say, I never saw him eat or drink anything, but he lived the last years of his life with Ginsberg in a little hotel next door where Ginsberg could pick up the tab. A real kind of vagrant, maverick type.
Yeah, true. Can you think of 2 events? Best and worst. Best performance ever, worst experience ever. Life as an artist.
I would mention Cage's Roly Holy Ogre at the top of the list. In Cologne, I was fortunate enough to have a lot to do with West German radio. I did 4 or 5 Hirschspiels, and so I got to go to that. If it wasn't a premiere, it was close to the initiation of that piece. Can't say enough about Klaus. He's retired now. But he would get the whole show together, and it was such a magnificent evening. So much attention to John, which of course John didn't have as a young composer. And so I was thrilled not only with the music, but with a maverick American composer who had not only made good, but made great stuff. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the worst performances that I've seen. Probably been people who made a kind of naturalistic and improvisatory connection with the audience, kind of a self-serving, almost, I just can't stand it, I can't even stay. Someone who's sort of fooling around with some person in the audience doesn't really have anything that they're about to be doing. I remember Cage once discussed someone who played his music in this style as if it was all just improvisation. And he found he had to leave the hall, he had to get out of the hall. He was with Fanny Shannon, I remember, that night. So really, really negative performances. I feel so strongly about performance in general that I don't stay if it's that bad. And I think it's such a privilege to have people focused on what you're trying to give them and to blow it, and to have it be tawdry and self-serving. I just can't bear it.
What's your greatest fear?
My greatest fear? Well, on a large scale, my greatest fear is that, and it comes into my dream life a lot, is that I simply don't know where I am. I'm either on the street. I mean, I practiced 3 times to get you in that door. It's elaborate. And I was told by this wonderful Bridget quickly how it could be done, but then could I do it, actually? And I'm someone who travels really all over the world, but if I'm lost in a city, I experience quite a bit of fear. And in terms of performing and presenting to people, I have a level of apprehension which is quite high, always. Always. And I don't approach it with serenity. I approach it with a lot of worrisome, stupid details that can catch me up. So I've kind of learned to do as Pauline has, a kind of meditation against that. Because usually I'm pretty sure the work is all right. It's whether I can measure up to the work. That's the problem.
Do you have a vital daily ritual?
Oh, yes. Before I eat, before I turn on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! At 9 a.m., I have a whole hour of yogic exercise and focusing I do. And I usually select someone for that very day that I will direct my energies to them. And if it's someone that I'm having difficulty with, I'm hoping that whatever I do that's good can mend their misunderstanding of something that happened to me that they misunderstood, or some writing which wasn't correct. The gnarly little things are just what we should focus on, to clear them, and to, as best we can, clear it with that person. It's why I'm not a good academic. I never could be. A lot of times people get into sort of screw points about history or about what the implications of a piece are, when actually what we learn from Cage is that if a piece is done right, the implications are free and for the giving and taking. What a piece means is not your business. To do it right is the challenge.
Thank you very much.
Wow, certainly enjoyed that.
Oh, good. So did I. That was great.
I got to turn my bean turner once.
Yeah, could I get a closer, while I hold the camera, can I just experience the bean turner once more, or anything else you have here?
And do it?
Sure, I'd love that. I'll do it with this microphone. Get that out of the way.
Where have you been?
I went upstairs for a bit, and then Phil came down.
Oh,
So
he did?
Yeah, I just told him you would either call him or just come up to his place.
Okay, I'll come up. I'll go up. What is it, 4th floor?
Yeah, he lives on the 4th floor. I actually forgot to ask. He has a studio on the 3rd floor. Forgot to ask him where he was going, but we can call him.
Okay, I'll call him. So Sandy's for Alison and Made for Me by Larry Miller.